I'm recording this from my home office at 4:23 a.m. because 12 hours ago I witnessed something I never thought I'd see in my career studying international relations: China publicly humiliating an ally in the most calculated, brutal way possible. What happened in Cape Town 3 days ago wasn't just a diplomatic snub. It was China announcing to the world that ideology means nothing when economics are on the line, and the implications of that announcement will reshape global alliances for the next generation. Because here's what really occurred. China, Iran's supposed partner in challenging American global dominance, just demonstrated that their relationship with Tehran is transactional, temporary, and entirely subordinate to Chinese economic interests. What I'm about to share with you reveals everything about how power actually works in the 21st century, why economic relationships trump ideological partnerships every time, and why Iran's regime now faces the terrifying reality that they're completely, utterly alone against the full weight of American economic and military power. The Cape Town humiliation. Let me paint you the exact picture of what happened in South African waters on January 12, 2026. Iran had been planning for Will for Peace 2,026 inches naval exercises for 8 months. Iranian naval vessels sailed 4,000 miles from Bandar Abbas to reach Cape Town. Iranian Admiral Mohammad Sayari flew to Cape Town personally for planning meetings. Then, at 6:47 p.m. local time on January 10th, exactly 36 hours before exercises were scheduled to begin, a Chinese naval attaché delivered a message that every intelligence service monitored within hours. Admiral, we regret to inform you that Iran's participation in these exercises is no longer possible due to evolving maritime security requirements. We suggest your fleet return to Iranian waters immediately. The humiliation was surgical. Iranian crews had to load their equipment and sail 4,000 miles home without participating in exercises they'd spent months preparing for in front of international media, in front of other BRICS members. But here's what makes this betrayal truly revealing. China didn't cancel the exercises, they just removed Iran from them. Chinese, Russian, Brazilian, and Emirati vessels conducted the planned operations exactly as scheduled. The message was unmistakable: BRICS unity continues, but Iran is no longer welcome. The trillion-dollar calculation. To understand Chinese decision-making, you have to understand how Chinese leadership thinks about economic relationships. They don't do ideology, they don't do sentiment, they do mathematics. Cold, brutal, precise mathematics. Here are the numbers that Chinese energy companies and government officials calculate every day. Iranian oil imports. China purchases 900,000 barrels per day of Iranian oil at $20.25 below market price. Annual savings $8.10 billion. Chinese exports to Iran. China sells $8.9 billion worth of manufactured goods to Iran annually. Total China-Iran trade, roughly $18.20 billion annually. Now here are the numbers that matter more. China-US trade, $760 billion annually. China-EU trade, $890 billion annually. China global trade, $6.2 trillion annually. When Trump announces a 25% tariff on any country doing business with Iran applied to all trade with the United States, Chinese executives started having emergency board meetings. The mathematics are brutal. Losing Iranian trade would cost China $20 billion annually. Losing access to American and allied markets would cost China $200, $400 billion annually. Chinese leadership looked at those numbers and made a decision that reveals everything about how they view international relationships. Iran isn't worth risking Chinese economic prosperity. The energy security facade. But doesn't China need Iranian oil for energy security? This is where Chinese strategic planning gets truly sophisticated. China imports roughly 11 million barrels of oil per day. Iran supplies about 900,000, roughly 8% of Chinese oil imports. That sounds significant until you examine Chinese energy diversification over the past 18 months. Russian oil. China increased imports from Russia by 400,000 barrels per day. Saudi Arabian oil. Chinese imports from Saudi Arabia increased by 200,000 barrels per day. American shale oil. Chinese companies increased purchases of American crude by 150,000 barrels per day through third-party brokers. Domestic production. Chinese domestic production increased by 100,000 barrels per day. Add those numbers: 850,000 barrels per day of alternative supply sources, almost exactly replacing potential Iranian losses. Chinese energy planners have been preparing for a world without Iranian oil for over a year. The supposed energy security justification for maintaining Iranian relationships was always a convenient fiction. The Beijing Politburo meeting. On January 8, 2026, the Chinese Politburo Standing Committee held an emergency 14-hour session to discuss Iran policy. According to my sources, three options were presented. Option 1, maintain full support for Iran, accept American tariffs, weather economic conflict. Option 2, reduce Iranian relationship to minimal levels, avoid American tariffs, maintain Western market access. Option 3, publicly distance from Iran while maintaining covert oil purchases through third parties. The economic modeling was devastating. Option 1 would cost China $300, $500 billion over 3 years. Option 2 would cost China $15, $20 billion in lost Iranian trade, but preserve $760 billion in American market access. Option 3 would cost China political credibility, but maintain both Iranian oil and American market access. Chinese leadership chose Option 2 with elements of Option 3. This is realpolitik at its most calculating. The Belt and Road Calculation. The Chinese abandonment of Iran goes beyond immediate trade calculations. It reveals something fundamental about China's global strategy. Iran has been central to Chinese Belt and Road Initiative planning for over a decade. China and Iran signed a 25-year strategic partnership agreement in 2021 worth a supposed $400 billion. So why abandon such a strategically important relationship? Because Chinese leadership has concluded that the Belt and Road Initiative's Middle Eastern components are less important than maintaining access to established Western markets. China spent $1 trillion over 15 years building Belt and Road infrastructure, but those alternate trade routes only matter if Chinese goods have markets to reach. If American tariffs make Chinese exports uncompetitive in Western markets, Belt and Road infrastructure becomes worthless. Chinese planners have realized that challenging American global dominance through infrastructure development is pointless if that challenge triggers American economic warfare that destroys Chinese export capacity. The technology transfer cutoff. Chinese abandonment extends beyond energy and trade to the most sensitive area, technology transfer and defense cooperation. For years, China has been Iran's primary source for advanced technologies, electronics and telecommunications equipment, military systems and missile guidance technology, dual-use nuclear technology, surveillance systems for internal security. All of these technology transfers have been quietly suspended over the past 4 months. Chinese technology companies have received explicit instructions from Beijing to avoid any Iranian business relationships that could trigger American sanctions. This technology cutoff is devastating because Iran's domestic technology sector depends entirely on Chinese supply chains. Without Chinese technology transfers, Iran cannot maintain existing military systems or develop new capabilities. The financial system isolation. Perhaps most devastating is what's happening in international financial systems. China has been Iran's primary gateway to global financial markets despite American sanctions. Chinese banks have processed Iranian transactions through complex yuan-based arrangements. Over the past 6 weeks, Chinese financial institutions have systematically cut ties. Bank of China suspended all direct transactions with Iranian institutions. China Construction Bank terminated trade financing arrangements. Agricultural Bank of China stopped processing payments for Iranian oil. China Development Bank suspended lending programs for Iranian infrastructure. These are permanent policy changes designed to eliminate Chinese exposure to American secondary sanctions. The financial isolation of Iran is now complete. Without Chinese financial cooperation, Iran cannot participate in international commerce or access capital markets. The strategic messaging. What makes Chinese abandonment so devastating isn't just the economic aspects, it's the strategic messaging. For years, China has promoted their global influence by offering an alternative to American dominance. Countries facing American pressure could turn to China for economic support and diplomatic protection. Iran was the flagship case for this Chinese alternative. Chinese abandonment destroys that narrative completely. If China won't support Iran, a country with massive energy reserves and aligned opposition to American hegemony, why would other countries trust Chinese commitments? Countries considering alignment with China now understand that Chinese support is conditional, temporary, and entirely subordinate to Chinese economic interests. This strategic messaging affects Chinese influence globally with Pakistan, Venezuela, North Korea, and Russia. Chinese abandonment of Iran reveals that China offers partnership, not alliance. The Moscow dilemma. Chinese abandonment creates enormous problems for Russia. Russia and Iran have been strategic partners. Iranian drones are killing Ukrainian soldiers. Iranian ports provide Russian naval access to the Indian Ocean. But if China abandons Iran under American economic pressure, what does that say about Chinese reliability for supporting Russia? Chinese trade with Russia totals $240 billion annually. Chinese trade with the United States and allies totals over $2 trillion annually. The mathematics that led to Chinese abandonment of Iran apply equally to Chinese relationships with Russia. Putin must be calculating whether China would abandon Russia if American economic pressure becomes sufficiently intense. The new Asian order. What we're witnessing isn't just Chinese abandonment of Iran. We're seeing the emergence of a new Asian order where China prioritizes access to Western markets over strategic relationships with American adversaries. This represents a fundamental shift in Chinese global strategy. Instead of challenging American dominance through alliance with American enemies, China is seeking accommodation with American power in exchange for economic access. The implications extend throughout Asia. Countries facing American pressure can no longer count on Chinese protection if that protection becomes economically costly. Chinese promises of alternative global governance become meaningless. American economic warfare becomes more effective at isolating adversaries. Regional powers must choose between alignment with America or complete isolation. This new dynamic favors American global dominance enormously. What this means for Iran. The Chinese abandonment represents the final collapse of Iranian hopes for external support during the regime's death spiral. Iran's strategy for surviving American economic warfare always depended on Chinese economic lifelines and Russian military support. Without Chinese cooperation, Iran loses access to global financial systems, technology transfers, and energy export markets. The Iranian leadership now confronts the terrifying reality that they're completely alone against the full weight of American economic and military power. This isolation accelerates regime collapse in several ways. Economic. Without Chinese markets and financial systems, Iran's economy contracts faster. Technological. Without Chinese technology transfers, Iran's military and nuclear capabilities degrade rapidly. Diplomatic. Without Chinese diplomatic support, Iran cannot access international organizations. Psychological. Without credible external allies, Iranian leadership faces internal pressure from elites seeking American accommodation. Chinese abandonment isn't just economic adjustment. It's a death sentence for Iranian hopes of surviving American pressure through external partnership. The countdown accelerates. I'm going to tell you something that Chinese leadership understands, but most Western analysts don't. Iran's regime has maybe 30 days before their isolation becomes irreversible. Chinese abandonment was the final piece of Iran's economic strangulation. Without Chinese financial cooperation, energy purchases, and technology transfers, Iran cannot maintain basic government functions. Iranian leadership knows this. They understand that external support is no longer available and internal collapse is accelerating. This creates maximum incentives for desperate behavior over the next month. If Iran's regime is going to collapse anyway, they might attempt to create external crises while they still have capability to inflict damage. Nuclear acceleration, regional proxy activation, Strait of Hormuz closure, terrorist attacks against American allies. All of these become more likely as Iranian isolation becomes complete and their timeline for survival shortens. Chinese abandonment doesn't just weaken Iran, it creates conditions where Iranian desperation could trigger exactly the kind of regional chaos that China, Russia, and America all want to avoid. In our next episode, we need to examine why Russia is doubling down on Iranian support just as China abandons them, why Putin thinks he can succeed where Chinese caution failed, and why Russian miscalculations about Iranian importance might trigger the broader conflict that careful Chinese planning was designed to prevent. Because what happens when a collapsing regime faces complete abandonment by rational allies and desperate support from irrational partners? The Iranian regime's death spiral just accelerated beyond anyone's ability to control.